What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Today we got Jack Abramoff. He is the star of the film Casino Jack and a documentary called Casino Jack. The film is starring Kevin Spacey, and the documentary is on Netflix also with the film with Kevin Spacey. You can check those out. It goes into his story, more in depth with his story and his history and his, just how he got in trouble, what he got in trouble for, and how he became the most powerful lobbyist in Washington history. He's been on the cover of Time magazine. He's been interviewed on 60 Minutes. He's been on the Colbert Report, Breaking the Set with Abby Martins, which you guys know is one of my favorite shows. And so he's a super interesting guy. It's pretty amazing that he goes from one of the most powerful and corrupt lobbyists to now being an activist, I guess, for a lack of a better term, against corruption in government. So it's a super interesting conversation. Hopefully you guys enjoy it. Also, my Theory 6 music project, as you guys know, a great way to support the show. It's finally available on iTunes. Before it was out as singles for some reason, but it's finally available as the full album on iTunes, so look that up. It's called Theory 6, The Ripple Effect EP, and it's just an EP, and it also has the theme songs for this podcast on there. So check that out. And like I said, a great way to support the show. I have a bunch of shows coming up, so keep a lookout. I have Abraham Bolden coming up. I have Brett from the School Sucks Project. I have Valerie Baber. I have a bunch of people, so just keep a lookout for shows. I'm gonna be whipping them out every week for the next couple weeks, trying to get them out before the crazy Christmas and New Year's time of year when everybody's just super busy. So keep a lookout for that, and enjoy the show. I'll see you guys next time. Do you ever get people who ask, hey, would you have a change of heart if you didn't get caught? How much of that, of getting in trouble has to do with your change of heart?
Yeah, no, they ask that all the time. And unfortunately, the answer is it has 100% to do with a change of heart. I mean, I didn't, frankly, when I was doing it, I didn't think there was much wrong with this. And so I didn't, I didn't have a problem with what I was doing. I think like most people who are doing it still today, they don't see what's wrong with it. And really, it took the end of my career and the scandal and everything for me to sit back and assess, well, now that it's over, let me look at this. And at first I was defending it, and making excuses, but eventually I came around to believing that this is just not what's best for the country.
Yeah. And I don't think there's that should minimize things, because I think that, everybody has a point in their lives where something happens and then it makes them reconsider maybe the path they're on or whatnot. So, I mean, I don't know how people ask that question or what their intentions are asking that question. Would you have not had a change of heart if you didn't get in trouble? But I don't think there's anything wrong with that, or it minimizes the fact that you did have a change of heart. And I think sometimes it does take big event that happens in our lives to really make us reconsider what path we're taking and our intentions, and if our heart's in the right place and all that stuff. Like you said, even though it maybe you wouldn't had a change of heart if you didn't get in trouble, at least the fact that you took the opportunity to kind of reflect on your life and stuff while you're unfortunately locked up for, what was it, 3.5 years, 3 years?
Yeah, about a little more than 3.5. Yeah. Yeah, Nick, right. You're right. And it'd be better to come to wise, sapient conclusions without external pressure, but sometimes it requires it. And as you say, I mean, oftentimes people will, in fact, most of the guys in the prison with me didn't come to the conclusion that they had done anything wrong. Just why were they getting picked on? And I decided differently.
Yeah, and that's actually, that's really common, where you just kind of feel like you're being picked on, and instead of taking the opportunity to self-reflect and re-examine, you actually end up just being angry with the system and mad that, you know, you got locked up in the first place. So yeah, I mean, you definitely could have took it in many different ways. So you know, to be able to kind of, and I mean, no better time than you know, than when you're locked up to self-reflect, because you probably don't have much more time to do it. You know, you don't have anything else to do. So I guess if you can,
you know, the thing is, I actually came to almost every one of these conclusions before I got in there. I had a long time from the beginning of the scandal until I wound up going to prison. And it was during that period when I started to change my mind, which is one of the reasons I pled and cooperated and that kind of thing. One of the reasons. I mean, there are other reasons too. But by the time I got to prison, I was already of the mindset that I had done wrong and that the system was wrong. The thing that changed for me in prison was that my intention was to serve my time and just sort of go away and hopefully fade into the background. It wasn't pleasant having all of this media attention. No part of it was pleasant, and I wanted to get away from it as quick as I could. But after the Congress passed a bill called the Honest Leadership in Government Act that was supposed to reform the system from the situations that I was involved in, and I saw this bill and realized that it not only didn't do that, but it really opened some other loopholes that maybe weren't even there. I decided that somebody had to speak out, and you know, that I was unfortunately in a position of having been there, that I could talk about things in a way that a lot of the people interested in reform didn't know about because they hadn't been inside those rooms. And that's sort of what prison, you know, the change of heart, as it were, in prison was more along those lines.
Yeah. And so I'm guessing you know, more than likely you watched the documentary and the film that was based on, you know, your whole lobbying career. Well, how accurate was, I know Kevin Spacey, he actually he went to meet you before he played the role, right? And kind of you know, just want to know who you were and whatnot, and he actually went to go meet you in prison. Yeah,
we spent about 3 hours together. He came during one of the visiting periods, and we had a nice chat, and I think I really like him. He's a great guy, great actor. I think the script from that movie was fatally flawed. Not only from, I mean, forget about from a factual point of view, it was a drama. It wasn't, I guess, supposed to be pure fact, but more from the point of view of it was just a bad script. And the story structure was not really solid. And when I read the script before he got there, I actually talked first to the director, who came first, and then to Spacey, and said that, in my view, the script stunk. It just wasn't a very good movie. It didn't have 3 discernible acts. It didn't have the normal setups in Act 1 that are paid off in Act 3, and there was no character growth, progression. It was just boring, and you know, and it was silly. I mean, the writer, who I never met the writer, I guess, wrote the movie out of the news clips, and he substituted in some kind of boring, tepid things, and as opposed to, you know, what really happened. And so that movie was, to me, not that impressive. It didn't do well in the box office, and it's a shame. What a waste of a great actor in Kevin Spacey, you know, for that project. The other movie, I mean, that film was, to me, kind of laughable. It was just an ideological assault on my background, coupled with kind of innuendo and accusations. And the guy who I know, and I like the director, his name is Alec Kidney, you know, he had a guy who was a representative of the law firm to speak on behalf of the sort of legal community. It was a guy who was fired by the law firm for inebriated, you know, bad actions, drunken bad behavior, and a bad lobbyist. So that was who he got to be their spokesman. The guy he got to be the spokesman of the conservative movement was somebody who used to work for me, who I had fired. And so there was just a series of things in that movie that were disappointing, because he came to prison, he spoke with me, and he pitched the movie as, in essence, a film that was going to be about the system. And of course, my story would play a part in it, but only to highlight that the system needed changes, and there would be other examples. And it just turned out to be basically a piñata affair of me, which, you know, I don't care. I mean, at that point, what's he going to do that is going to in any way impact the general trend of the negative media at that point? But it was disappointing. It wasn't a great film. Both of these films together in the box office, I don't think grossed, $1 million or $2 million combined. They were just not well received. And it's a shame, at some level. I mean, at some level, obviously, nobody wants to see a film about themselves that's negative, no matter what it looks like. But I guess looking back on the Scorsese film with Leonardo DiCaprio about the fellow who, the investment guy, I can't remember his name.
Oh yeah.
I wish a better director had been involved in the fiction and the so-called nonfiction, which seemed to be more fictional than fiction. It just was disappointing. The only thing I liked about that film was I got to see film clips of myself from the 80s that I'd never seen before.
Really?
Yeah, once I saw what kind of glasses we all wore in the 80s, I wasn't necessarily thrilled about that.
Well, believe me, we've all made our fashion mistakes.
Yeah.
But you've had quite a. Usually, I asked this before we start recording, but the conversation got good, so I just started recording. But how much time do you have by any chance?
I've got to definitely be done by about 10 to 1, if that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. And so, yeah, well, I'm recording just in case you wanted to know. I figured sometimes I start recording just because I'll get in these good conversations before the show. Then I get upset that I didn't record it.
Yeah, no problem.
But, yeah, so you've had a pretty amazing, you know a little bit about movies, too, because you actually gave up being a film producer to go into lobbying. What was the transition? And the one thing I will say about the films, even though you're right, I can see how they, it does seem like the documentary Casino Jack was kind of like, I mean, it was focused on you, and it was, it's kind of unfair if they told you that it was more about the system. But isn't your story a great highlight of how corrupt the system is? Because you were one of the most powerful lobbyists, in American history, and obviously you got a lot of things done. You made a lot of friends, and I guess it's you probably look back at it and probably wish you weren't good at it, but you're really good at what you did. And isn't your story a perfect example of what's wrong with the system? So even though it kind of focused on you, didn't the intentions...
I didn't mind them focusing on me. My complaint of the focus on me wasn't that they focused on me to examine how I use the tools of lobbying to sort of play and game the system. That would have been just fine. They focused on me to attack me as a conservative, as a Republican activist, and just also they brought in on the lobbying side, instead of focusing on how we basically got members to do what they did, they kind of went with the cartoon version, and they started attacking the things we lobbied on, and it just was really disappointing. That's what I mean by it. I didn't expect to have the thing laud me, certainly not, and I would have preferred them focusing as I do when I speak, by the way, and I did in my book. Talking about what are the kind of things that I did that are, especially those that are still going on today. How do those impact the system? How does this behavior sculpt our government? That to me was actually what was interesting about what he said he wanted to do. By his attacking me as a right winger and a Republican, and I mean, what the heck? That has nothing to do with that.
Do you still consider yourself a Republican? Because I've had Roger. I don't know if you're familiar with Roger Stone. He's a political consultant. He worked with Reagan and Nixon and wrote the book "The Man Who Killed Kennedy: The Case Against LBJ." And
yeah, I'm very familiar with this guy.
Yeah. And he can. I've had him on the show, and he told me that he basically he left the Republican Party and now he's a libertarian, and it seems like a lot of people are doing that. Is that something that you're also do you see yourself?
No, I can't vote, so I don't really have a political party, but I am, unlike Roger, I'm a conservative. I'm not a libertarian. I mean, I guess I do share views with a lot of libertarians on a number of issues, but at the end of the day, particularly on defense, I'm not a libertarian. And so I'm, if I could vote, I would vote Republican because they are the party that makes the most sense. I think people who, and by the way, I'm somebody who voted for third-party candidates in presidential elections. I voted for Howard Phillips instead of voting for George Bush 41, and instead of voting for Bob Dole. So I have voted for third parties, but the truth is, when you vote for a third party or you're in a third party in America, you're irrelevant because the two political parties are culturally, socially, politically, and in every other way dominant in this country. And there just is no realistic path for a third party unless a dot-com billionaire decides to pull $20 billion, put it down, and build from the bottom up a new political party. It ain't going to happen. So, it's easy way out. I mean, I of all people could say I'm a libertarian, I'm a whatever, because I can't vote anyway. All right, so there are no practical ramifications of my position, but I don't think it's realistic to think of a third party effort in this country. It's just, from the left or the right. And usually what the third party efforts do is drain votes from the party closest to them, in the same way that Ralph Nader did it with the Green Party from Al Gore and the Democrats, and in the same way that Ross Perot, although that wasn't quite a conservative party, the Reform Party, but Bill Clinton would never have beaten George Bush but for Ross Perot.
Yeah.
Bill Clinton never got 50% of the vote.
Yeah, I understand that point of view, but don't you think that if these politicians honestly, I mean, I think that Ralph Nader and Ross Perot still, they influence people by just putting their ideas out there, from being going against the grain and just seeing that, oh crap, there's other people out there who have different opinions, who are saying things that make sense. And I don't know, I know Ralph Nader got a lot of crap for running again, even though he, people said you knew you weren't going to win, and then that's why he didn't get all the help the second time around. But I still think if his heart was in the right place and he felt like, hey, I should get these ideas out there. And the other thing is too, the debates. Like, I think the debates are a joke because they don't let a third party in. So if you can't debate, you can't win. I know Jesse Ventura, when he won as an independent, that was a huge changing factor, was that he got included in the debates. And so, I mean, how do we change that? How do we get, because I mean, do you even feel like that's even a problem? Are you okay with the two parties? Because I mean, obviously, I think
I'm not necessarily in agreement with the two parties often, but it's not a question of whether I agree with it or not. It's just a non-changing reality. There may be the odd situation where an independent will win a governorship. Maybe, like in the Lieberman case, kind of a weird thing, or in Lisa Murkowski running as a independent for the Senate and maybe for the House, but, it's just very rare. So just politics is, and I'm, by the way, extremely ideological, but I realize at the end of the day, this is what's going to happen. So the play for liberals is to take over the Democratic Party, which they seem to have had some success doing, and the play for conservatives is to do the same to the Republicans, which they seem to have had success doing. And in terms of getting other ideas out there, I'm not against getting other ideas out there, certainly not, because I don't agree personally with a lot of the ideas of the establishment part of the Republican Party, and I don't agree with virtually everything the Democrats do. So not entirely everything, but almost everything. And so I'm totally in favor of other ideas getting out there. I just think that from a practical point of view, that's different than affecting the outcome of an election against your core ideology. Just as I didn't vote for Bush either. Okay, I didn't vote for Perot or Bush. I voted for the Taxpayer Party candidate because I couldn't stand Bush, and I certainly wasn't going to vote for Clinton, and I thought Perot was nuts. So for me, there was no candidate. In those days when I could vote, I voted. But I didn't have any presumption that this was going to impact the election, particularly since I voted in Maryland, which up until this year is basically a foregone conclusion to go Democrat.
Yeah. So how do we fix it? Because I mean, I know that you believe in the free market to some extent, and you believe in I know Tom DeLay, who obviously was a big part of your story. He he was known for trying to deregulate everything. And but don't you think that, like you said, couldn't somebody, a .com billionaire, just run for president and win as a third party, because money has such an influence in politics where basically almost every time whoever spends the most money wins? And
well, you can't just come in and spend the money. You've got to build a political infrastructure. The reason the person who spends the most money wins is because they've got under them, both parties do, a huge political infrastructure. For somebody to come in, let's say I had $20 billion and I wanted to be president of the United States. I couldn't just start spending it right now and win in 2016. It would be almost impossible. You have to build an election operation. Elections aren't just won on the media, which is where you spend most of your money, by the way. They're won by building turnout organizations, by finding people who are similarly situated ideologically, philosophically, who believe in what you have to say. I mean, it's not an easy endeavor. And that's why these third parties are often spoilers. They don't have serious infrastructures, party infrastructures. I guess the libertarians are the biggest of them, of the third parties currently in America, and they just don't have the infrastructure sufficient, frankly, to win one seat in the national legislature, let alone, president. So I think that even if the dot-com billionaire wanted to do it, they'd have to realize, he or she would have to realize, you're in for a 10, 15-year process. You're not going to just show up and put your money down and buy things. That's not how it goes. Americans aren't that cynical. They can just be bought, or that they just see a TV commercial. And by the way, a lot of them aren't watching TV anymore. In the old days, All in the Family was watched by 50, 60, 70 million people. Today, Mad Men was a successful show with an audience under 2 million. So everything has become very different. So I don't think you can just do that. You'd have to build from the beginning a party that had sufficient ideological breadth that people would actually, A, want to get involved with it, B, agree with it, and C, want to be activists in it. Let's not forget, activists win politics, not passive people. People who go spend their day campaigning, working, mailing things, phone calling, that group wins, okay? So you'd have to find the activists. There's so much to do, and that's why, given especially that the media inclination in this country, the news media have in particular become virtually all of them tabloid, not thinking, repetition, whoever says something, they repeat it, they're echo chambers. So to get a serious third-party effort going, you're talking billions of years, you're talking billions of dollars, you're talking a number of years, and a very, you have to weather also, then the two parties aren't going to just sit by and watch you do it. They're going to be destroying you. So it's a very tough gig, I guess is what I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I definitely think that, the Mad Men example is a good example, because I think that the younger generation is moving away from TV. And I think it's probably a good thing that they're moving away from TV and going to the internet and going to podcasts instead of domestic radio, because I think that they're going to get a more uncensored version. They're going to get, they can find more different opinions, different perspectives. And, it's not just, obviously MSNBC trying to sell a story one way, Fox News selling it another way, and I'm not sure what CNN does anymore, to be honest. But so I definitely think that I think it's a good thing that TV is not doing well, because it's paid and bought for by big corporations, and when you have commercials that are going in between segments, you have to assume and understand that those commercials, those corporations that are putting those commercials on are having some influence on the way those stories are being spun to the public. And so what's your opinions on public financing? You don't think that something like that would work for politicians?
No, I don't, because first of all, I think the trend toward more and more government control is the problem in America. For years, progressives and liberals have wanted to use the government to right the wrongs of society. And corporatists, the crony capitalists, have been using the government to make a buck. And the problem is, both of them have conspired, in essence, together to build this monolith of government control of our lives. And I think that there are more and more progressives coming to the realization that this is a problem, that the more federal programs, the more federal control you have, the more the people who control the federal government are going to control that. So I tell people that if I were still a lobbyist, and I were a real, even worse than the worst of the lobbyists, which, by the way, a lot of them are, and I saw new federal financing for elections, I would tomorrow open up a campaign arm of my lobbying shop, and I would run around the country and basically line up candidates and take 10 to 20% of their budget, federal money, okay, as my fee. And I'd be running a couple hundred candidates out there, and I wouldn't be alone. And by the time you're done, you're going to have the same people in control, because they're the ones who know how to run the campaigns. They're the ones who know how to work the federal money. And also, by the way, that's totally apart from the fact that you're going to be having bureaucrats ultimately decide who the candidate should be. All right. I mean, really, you can't have 1,000 people get money in a district, right? So what are you going to do? So it's just not practical. I understand the motivation behind it, which is to reduce the amount of money in politics that is that's out there. But I think a better solution to this, and there is no, by the way, there is no easy solution. There just is no solution that solves all the problems. Okay, so for me, a better solution is to bar lobbyists and special interests and people lobbying the federal government for parts of the money pot. Bar them from giving any money. Bar them from the election process. Okay, and allow people who want to participate without getting anything back, let them give whatever they want. Now, people say to me, well, that means there'll be a lot less money available for elections. And I say, yes, good. Either you figure out how to go out to the internet and raise money and sell your ideas to people who aren't going to be getting things back from you, or you don't get elected. And so might as well start now. So now there are flaws with that too, by the way, because as you get into the details of this, it's quite devilish figuring out who is a lobbyist, who is a special interest, at what point does somebody move from general interest to special interest? There's all sorts of problems in that, but that to me is a better solution than trying to create a program whereby federal funding goes to candidates. Because I can tell you right now, I know lobbyists who would tomorrow be all over that money. Okay, all over that money. They'd be 5 or 6 people behind the scenes, but they'd be creating candidacies, they'd be organized in districts, they'd be running their own candidates, and not just Republicans, they'd be Democrats also. I mean, everybody's involved in this game. And so that's why I think federal funding, it's a great idea. Can't we all have sort of an equal playing field? I agree with that, but we have to approach it in a way that's, in my view, sensible and realize who we're up against. We're up against some very smart people who have spent 50 years taking every dollar they can out of our pockets through taxation and through other ways to get money into their corporations, into their hands, into their causes, into whatever they want. They're very good at it, and I was one of them. Okay, and so if we put federal financing, that's just one problem. I mean, I have other philosophical issues with it, but putting that aside, I don't think practically it will work. I think it will create another problem. In the same way, by the way, that the advent of the 17th Amendment to the Constitution, 101 years ago, they put the 17th Amendment in, which was the amendment moving the election of U.S. senators from the state legislatures to the general public. Okay, and it was done, by the way, it was a progressive movement idea, and it was done ostensibly because there was corruption. People were buying their seats through bribing state legislators, etc. And that was the reason for it in terms of the public reason. Part of the other reason was that the progressive movement did not want the states to have, as they did in the U.S. Senate, a veto over federal expansion, which is what that 17th Amendment provided. Now, all right, so here's a good idea, in essence, from a corruption point of view. Let's fast forward to today. There is no Senate race in this country that you can win with less than 7 figures, and almost every one of them now is becoming 8 figures. And some of them are approaching 9 figures, okay? So now where's that money coming from? It's coming from the lobbyists. It's coming from the special interests, not coming from the people. So the unintended consequences of the 17th Amendment, which, by the way, I'm not saying we're going to repeal the 17th Amendment, although we should. It's not possible. You're not going to have any constitutional changes in this country. But the unintended consequence of this is there's far more corruption than there ever was in the half dozen state houses that they accused of having people come in and buy their seats. So the federal government, I think the general rule of thumb for me at least is the more power they get, the more problems are likely to ensue. And so we have to find other ways to solve our problems. And again, I have one solution, which is the removal of funding on the part of the lobbyists and the special interests, in the federal political campaigns. Now, will that happen? It's not going to be exactly easy because the people voting on this stuff are the ones who have their face in the trough.
Yeah, well, I think one of the big issues is the fact that a lot of these laws and rules and regulations are they're written by the people who are going to benefit by, you know, the earmarks and benefit by, you know, the loopholes and stuff like that. So I mean, you know, you know way better than I do that a lot of these politicians, they don't even read the bills that they're voting on. They don't, you know, they spend most of their time just begging for money. You know, there's I remember reading a statistic that there's like 20 lobbyists, or at least registered lobbyists, for every congressman. So I definitely agree with the idea that we need a smaller government. And I think most people today, especially when you see our defense spending and you just see just how crappy, I mean, if anybody who's ever been to the IRS, RMV, or called unemployment or anything like that, they know how bad of a job they do basically taking care of anything. But I don't think it's just a government issue. I think corruption, I know that like one side likes to say it's a government issue, the other side likes to put the blame on corporations, and I think that the common denominator is that it's a corruption issue. And I think,
of course, yeah, absolutely, it's both of them. It's everybody.
Yeah,
and it's unions too. I mean, it's basically people who are seeking power over other people, and that's Republicans and Democrats. That's everybody. So it's not just people in the government; it's people who use the government, corporations, unions, etc., who have their own aims. Absolutely right.
Yeah, and I think that's what's scary about people who fall into a certain ideology. I've had very civil conversations with people, and then you'll have that one topic where they just go completely off the rails. Where, you know, I remember having a debate once with a mutual friend of ours, or a friend of a mutual friend, and he was completely, we were on the same page with all these conversations. All of a sudden we talked about unions, and he went completely off the rails. And I'm just like, listen, I understand that unions at one time had a purpose. And when, you know, obviously when there's, you know, big corporations that were just, you know, not giving people raises and a fair wage and all this stuff, I understand that. But they have, you know, there obviously is corruption in that too. Any place where people can make money, somebody will sneak in there and find a way to kind of squeeze the money out of it. And he went irate. He was like, no, you know, if it wasn't for unions and and I think that's a scary thing. I think anytime you decide that, hey, I picked this team, I'm a Republican, I'm a Democrat, I'm a progressive, I'm a liberal, I'm a libertarian, I think you kind of, you put blinders on, and then it's almost like picking a sports team, you know, like, oh, I'm a Patriots fan, you're a Giants fan, so I can never agree that, you know, Manning's a good quarterback because I'm a Patriots fan. It's just so I feel like we have to look at ideas and not look at the ideologies behind it, or the titles, I should say, of the ideology that supports that idea, and, you know, and just look at ideas. So I think that it's you know, it's one of those things where we kind of do need to start opening people's minds to different ideas. And that's why I think the third party was at least a good thing, because I think people were stuck in, I mean, there's a lot of people who were Democrats and Republicans who said, holy shit, Ralph Nader said a lot of things that made sense, or Ross Perot said a lot of things that made sense, or, you know, even more recent, Ron Paul said a lot of things that made sense. I mean, I was a huge Ron Paul supporter, just because, even though I'm not even a libertarian, I agree with a lot of libertarian views, and you know, I don't agree with everything, but I mean, a lot of things he said just made sense. And you know, how do you see that as a huge issue, or do you think that a lot of it, you know, on TV? Because I remember Jesse Ventura once said, you know, politics is like wrestling. On TV, we act like we dislike each other, but behind the scenes, we're all going out to dinner and making deals. And is that true? Is that what you saw? That a lot of, because I mean, I know that you were, at least in the Kevin Spacey film, it seemed like it didn't really make you didn't mold you into an awful person. It seemed like you just kind of took a path, and one thing led to another. And was that the case, or, you know, did you really, or does money just end up polluting everything, or do these people really do have ideologies? Because sometimes I feel like, I guess the question is, it seems like a lot of politicians, they only say what politically is correct, or they'll say, hey, I'm very Christian or very Catholic, or I'm this or I'm that, to try to get votes, or really is that just all bullshit for the sake of, you know, I guess getting votes, or you know, what motivates these guys? Is it just money, or some of these guys really have good intentions? I mean, what is it?
Okay, you have about 100 questions.
Sorry about that. I was trying to find a way to articulate that, but I couldn't. I guess I had a bunch of different things I wanted to say, and yeah, it would definitely, you know, I guess the root of it was, is politics really just like wrestling? Is it just BS what we see on TV? Are they just saying, you know?
No, I don't think so. I think that most of the people articulate positions that they personally support, and they, you know, absolutely want to promote. There's a difference between that and going to kind of warfare with each other at every turn. You don't have that necessarily because generally people want to get along. Look at it like this. I think you used a very good analogy of that people view their politics like their sports team. The Giants can never be good if I like, the Cowboys or something like that. I think you actually ought to even ratchet it up a bit. It's more like a religion, okay? Because ultimately, I'm I guess, a Redskins fan. There's really no point to being a Redskins fan for almost at any level at this point. But, but I admit that the Redskins are, they stink. They have bad, basically the entire operation's terrible. I'm willing to admit that to friends of mine that are Cowboys fans. But religion, okay, if somebody is an ardent, Catholic, and they're in a room arguing with an ardent Protestant, okay, there's no admission, the Pope that was pretty stupid. You're not going to see that, okay? It's basically their religion, that's who they are. They're not going to change who they are. Their kids might. Their kids may say, and in fact, that's, I think, what we see going on in politics here, that, you've been Democrats for 20 generations, Mom and Dad, but I don't frankly care. I'm not interested. I don't agree with them. I think they're all a bunch of jerks, so I'm now an independent. Now, that, I think, is generally what's going on there. So with that model, congressmen, a congressman of one religion can go have dinner with a congressman of a religion as long as the theological discussion doesn't start, okay? They can certainly get along. The same way that, I'm an Orthodox Jew. I have so many very good friends who are very religious Catholics, and we get together all the time, and we talk all sorts of other fun and interesting topics. We don't get into theological discussions as to who's right and who's wrong, okay? Because if we did, we would not agree. And I don't think we'd be at each other's throats necessarily, but we would not be agreeing. So I think that's what goes on in Washington. You have a lot of people who have very firm beliefs, but they're not, they don't want to be jerks to each other. These are human beings. These are Americans. I think that at the core, most people believe that almost everybody has everybody else's good, good in mind at heart. That I believe, for example, that liberals want a better country. I think liberals want a good society. I may not agree with every detail of what liberals want in terms of society, but I think they generally want a very good thing. Liberals I know, friends of mine, agree that conservatives also want this. Now, not every conservative and not every liberal wants this. Some people want war, okay? But most people want to have peace, prosperity, make sure, your family's safe and okay, and, you want the basic things of life, and you don't mind your other fellow citizens getting them too, okay? The difference is, how do we get to that? Now, how do we get to that becomes the reason to kill each other, okay? Because, I want to get to that, and I believe you liberals, your view is going to get us all killed. Your view is going to make sure that the United States goes under. Or conservatives, your view is going to basically wind up having people have racism against them. Or your view is going to bankrupt the Americans and let corporations, whatever. So then the ideology or the methodology of getting somewhere becomes the problem. And then you can't get along. That is what's going on now. You have one party at its core, the Republicans, who believe that the Democrats are mentally ill. Okay, that they are basically taking the side of people who are against the United States, that they're not loyal, that they are stupid economically, that they're trying things that have failed for 100 years, and that if we let them keep doing it, we're going to wind up with no health care in this country, no basic economy. We're going to wind up impoverished and probably the vassal state of the Chinese, okay, in the extreme. Mm-hmm. On the other side, you have people who believe that the conservatives are trying to, in essence, impoverish, if not slay, the unfortunate and those who don't look like, white males, and blah, 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 blah. And that their foreign policy is one that's going to get every American killed because all we do is go to war. So you have very diametrically opposed views, right? And these views, unfortunately, bleed into the political system naturally. That's where the policies are espoused. And so that's why we have, Americans are at each other's throats. This country is divided right down the middle in terms of our beliefs. And in Washington, I think you have, for the most part, people who take one side of that or another side of it, but their demeanor and how, gentlemanly or gentleladily, or whatever the word is, if there is a word, they are, is just a personality issue. And then you have people who don't give a crap about it, who are in the middle, who basically, I can prosper under Republicans, I can prosper under Democrats, I don't care who's running the show, I don't care about any of those issues, I'm here to make a buck, okay? That class of people is the one to watch out for, okay? And that class of people are the ones who use money and manipulate the system and bring cynicism on the rest. I am a conservative. I respect Bernie Sanders. I don't agree with Bernie Sanders, but I respect Bernie Sanders because I think he says what he believes. He's honest about it. He's not, mendacious, and he's not corrupt. Now, I don't hope not one thing Bernie Sanders believes becomes policy. Not one, okay? But I respect him. I can't say that that's the case for every Republican. I don't respect every conservative and Republican, and I certainly don't respect every Democrat. So there are examples where I think people can go beyond the ideology and respect each other, but just not agree on policy.
Before I move on to my next question, I hope you find the humor in the fact that you're a Redskins fan. I actually thought that was at first I'm like, wait, is he joking? Because obviously you're called Casino Jack and all that stuff. I'm like, wait.
Well, I wrote a letter. It's in my book. I wrote a letter to Dan Snyder when he took over the team. I wrote him a 10-page letter. I didn't know him at that point. And I was a very big customer in that stadium. I had 2 suites and a bunch of tickets. I had like 70 tickets. And I wrote him a letter on a number of matters that I thought needed to be changed. The biggest part of that letter was to tell him that I felt he should change the name of the team to the Washington Warriors. Okay? And that he should phase out the use of tribal symbols, particularly the feathers, which was highly offensive. And that if he were to do this, as the new incoming head of the team, he would assume a mantle of moral leadership in the city, in the same way that Abe Pollin did for changing the name of the Bullets to the Wizards. And that since he was coming in, this was the ideal time to do it. And I wrote him a letter that if he didn't do it, it would one day become a problem for him. And he's going to have to do it. But he called me up and he told me in no uncertain terms that he was not going to change the name of the team. He loved the Redskins since he was a little kid. And, that was that. And so, I still am in favor of him changing the name. And I think that the Redskins organization sort of entrenching themselves with this and putting out this, silliness about how American Indians love this name. It's crazy. So
and you would know because you obviously dealt a lot with the Native Americans and Indians, and you did business with them. So did you ever have a conversation with any of them?
Often, and not one of them was offended by the name.
Really?
That I met, but that's not the issue. That's not the issue. Okay. There are probably African Americans out there who aren't offended by being called Negro. Okay. But nobody in society would do that, okay? So there may be American Indians, Native Americans who are not offended by Redskin. But some Native Americans are offended by Redskin. And I personally think they probably should be offended by the word Redskin. And, this etymology discussion of, well, it really comes from something special. And what in the world are we doing here? This is a sports team, for God's sakes. Change the name.
Yeah, there's some things more are bigger than sports. I mean, obviously, the history of the name and stuff. I understand growing up watching it, but like you said, if it offends some people, and actually, I think Washington Warriors is actually a pretty catchy name, to be honest. I actually think.
What was interesting is he. So I wrote him this letter, and I told him also, by the way, the feathers and the headdress of the band was actually more offensive to Native Americans because it has religious implications than the name. Okay, so both of them have to go. So I give him this whole thing. I said, Washington Warriors. anyway, he said no, he didn't want to do it. So then a few months later, he registers the name Washington Warriors.
Oh, wow.
for the Arena Football. Yeah, I don't think he ever bought it, but he was going to buy the Arena League football team, okay, and call it the Washington Warriors. So, but it just would be such a smart, in my view, solution here. If your name offends somebody as pejorative of their race, change it, okay? Change it. I mean, if people would die by you changing it, okay, let's talk about that if something like that could ever happen. But if it's a sports team, really? You're not going to change it? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. But look, it's his team. It's not my team. If it were my team, it would have been changed within a nanosecond of owning it.
Yeah, I think he's just now he just wants to stick to his guns. But you made a really good point about how politics becomes religion, because I think it's similar to the atheist creation debates you see online and on TV. It just nobody ever really ends up leaving the debate saying, "Oh no, I think I changed my mind. I think you made sense." It's just one of those things where I think people have this, they get stuck in this ideology, and then it just really there's no bending from it, and I think that's a huge issue. But I know you were talking about what influences politicians and how some of them are influenced by ideology and stuff. But wouldn't it, you obviously spend a lot of money on talking about sports teams on tickets for games and all this stuff. I mean, a lot of these politicians, if the money's coming and wouldn't they be influenced to maybe do something that's against a little bit of their ideology if it means that, hey, I'm going to get more money for campaigning and stuff? So how much is
there aren't a lot of politicians who do that.
Really?
Yeah, there aren't really. You don't need to do it, by the way, because there are plenty of people with money on your side as well. And the art of being a good lobbyist is not to try to convince a member of Congress to do something that is antithetical to their philosophical beliefs. I mean, first of all, you're not going to succeed, and it's just not going to happen. I mean, you don't have members of Congress who do that. I mean, once in a blue moon, but you would not have a successful lobbying practice. The art of being a lobbyist is to explain your issue, what your position is, and consistent with the philosophical approach of the congressman and the political approach of the congressman, to show them why doing what you want them to do is consistent with what they believe. If you can't do that, I mean, many times we couldn't do that because we had, things that some people opposed. We just didn't lobby them. You don't need to go lobby 435 congressmen, okay? You find the ones who are going to support you, who are going to be able to be influencers in the bill, and you work with them, and you get them activated and motivated, and that's where the fundraising comes in, which is, okay, I agree with him, and he's a major donor to me now, or he's a major provider of money to me, so I want to spend the time, I will take the time to help this lobbyist because he is taking the time to help me do something we both agree in, okay? That's usually the way it is. And the ones who are doing something where they're going to change what they believe, they aren't going to last very long, and they're almost certainly headed to scandal.
Yeah, but I mean, you hear stories like the DC Madam and like, politicians being hooked up with the escort services and stuff. And actually, I'm going to have Valerie Barber on, or Baber, I should say, from the FBI Emperor's Club investigation. And I mean, there was tons of what led to Elliot Spitzer's, scandal. But, it's one of those things where it just seems like, when you're getting that much money thrown at you, escorts, all this stuff, it just seems like, probably ideology in some cases probably isn't that important when you look at, if you're getting some serious money. So, I mean, I guess from the outside, I mean, you would know better than I.
Let me respond to that. First of all, the escort thing is minuscule, okay? You couldn't count on the fingers of one hand, or you wouldn't need more than one hand to count the amount of members who are involved in something like that. Okay, the stories are always overblown, but I'm telling you, I never encountered that at all, ever. Okay, in terms of the money, again, don't forget, these are people taking public actions who have to every 2 years run for re-election. So they're not going to be that willing to do the bidding of somebody that they can't defend it. In other words, the question is, how do you defend it? If I'm going to vote for you, Mr. Lobbyist, on this bill, you want me to vote yes, and I don't necessarily believe yes, and I'm going to vote yes, I need to be able to explain this vote, because I'm going to be debating somebody, I'm going to be at a town hall, somebody's going to ask me about it. If you're unprepared to answer that question, you're not going to win your next election. And these people, these are professionals. Their job is getting reelected, it seems, and they're good at it. And so I think it's going to be very, very rare, again, that you get somebody to do something that they don't otherwise believe. Now, they can believe a million things. You only have 24 hours in the day. The question, and where the lobbying takes place, really, is on how do you get a congressman to take part of that day and dedicate it to what you want them to do? That's the question. Okay? And, getting that done is through your contacts and your relationship and, everything else and the money you raise for them. But it's so rare that it's well, I'm totally against you, but I'll support you. They're not going to do it because they have to be able to stand up and say, here's why I made that vote. And the answer can't be because this guy gave me money. Well, let alone gave me a prostitute.
Yeah. I hear you. I know we're running a little bit out of time. So before I let you go, two quick questions. What was the craziest thing you ever got for a politician, or the most money you ever spent on either a vacation or car or anything like that? And how often do people in politics, because obviously you hear a lot about it, like people coming from the private sector to Washington and vice versa. How common is that?
What do you mean coming from the private sector to Washington?
Like you see people like, for example, Liz Fowler, who was a VP of WellPoint for external affairs. She was a big part of writing the Affordable Care Act. And who else? I mean, off the top of my head, Hank Paulson, wasn't he Goldman Sachs CEO?
They come in and take a position in government.
Yep.
It's very common. Every administration brings in all sorts of new people, and plus people who are already in town. That's where the government draws from. I don't have a particular objection, by the way, to people moving from the private sector into the government. My objection is them moving back out into the lobbying sector from the government. I don't think it's a problem, and I think it'd be stupid to not avail oneself of the, frankly, very bright policy people who are in the private sector when trying to build a policy team. So I think that happens all the time. What was the first part of the question again?
Oh, and then it was more of a not as serious as a question, but what was the craziest thing you ever bought, or how much that for a policy?
I didn't lavish gifts on people. I owned a restaurant. They ate there for free. I did have a plane. I guess probably the biggest thing was I would fly members to play golf in Scotland during the summer and pay for the trip. And that, it was expensive. It came out to be $100,000 or more. But, I didn't buy anybody gifts or anything because, again, they'd be an idiot to take it. What are they going to do with this gift?
Yeah. You have to find creative ways to indirectly, get money to them, I guess. But so
you don't need creative and indirect. You can just raise the money.
Yeah.
Okay, you just give them checks.
Yeah, thanks.
For their campaigns. That's very direct and very simple and very corrupt, and that's why we have a problem.
Yep.
It's completely legal and completely normal to these guys.
Yeah, I think it's. I'll tell you. I mean, probably some of my listeners are going to call me crazy, but I think it's awesome what you're doing. I think the fact that a lot of people out there talk about Washington corruption and all this stuff, and to have somebody who's in the inside actually talking about it, and I think it's a good thing. And I think that your book, for listeners who aren't familiar with it, he wrote a book called Capital Punishment: The Hard Truth About Corruption from America's Most Notorious Lobbyists. So check that out. Check the documentaries out if you but hopefully people listen to this show first so they can kind of get a look at the documentary and the film from a different perspective. But I think it's awesome that you're going. I mean, I remember seeing you on 60 Minutes, on you're on Breaking the Set with Abby Martins. You've been all over the place, and talking about the issues with politics. And I think if people can kind of put aside your ideologies or your beliefs and just look at I guess the overall picture of what you're trying to say, I think it's a positive thing. We can take something from it. Thanks a lot for being on, and keep up the good work. I think it's awesome that you're sparking these conversations.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, thanks. Have a good one.